My name is Olivia, and at 31 years old, I never expected to become my father's primary caregiver. I spent 6 months watching him fade away, only for his will to seemingly reward my brother, Ethan, with a multi-million-dollar business while I got our rundown family farmhouse. Ethan smirked at me across the lawyer's office. "Should have taken better care of him," he whispered. Then the lawyer cleared his throat. "Actually, there's something else you both need to know." Ethan's face went completely white at what came next. Before I continue my story, let me know where you're watching from. Hit the like button and subscribe if you've ever discovered something valuable wasn't what it first appeared to be. Growing up, our family dynamic seemed simple enough. My father, Robert Hayes, built his agricultural supply business from nothing but determination and an old pickup truck. By the time I was born, Hayes Farm Solutions was already becoming a regional powerhouse, supplying equipment and services to farms across 3 states. My mother, Margaret, was the creative heart of our family. She painted landscapes that captured the soul of rural America and kept our sprawling farmhouse filled with warmth. My brother Ethan was 5 years older than me, and from the beginning it was clear he was being groomed to take over the family business. I remember watching from the doorway of Dad's office as he taught Ethan about profit margins and inventory management before my brother could even drive. Ethan absorbed these lessons eagerly, his notebooks filled with calculations and business plans. By the time he was 15, "Your brother has a natural head for business," Dad would say proudly. Just like me. I was different. Where Ethan saw numbers, I saw colors. Where he calculated value, I found beauty. My mother encouraged my artistic talents, setting up a small studio for me in the sunroom overlooking the apple orchard. When I was 12, she was diagnosed with aggressive breast cancer. Within 6 months, she was gone, leaving a gaping hole in our family that we never truly filled. Dad threw himself into the business after Mom died. The company doubled in size over the next 5 years, expanding into agricultural technology and farm management software. Ethan was right there with him, learning everything, preparing for his future role. I retreated into my artwork and books, finding solace in creating and imagining worlds beyond our loss. By the time I graduated high school, the path forward seemed predestined. Ethan would go to business school and join Dad in running Hayes Farm Solutions. I would pursue art, disappointing my father, but staying true to myself. Our family dinner the night I announced my decision to attend art school in Minneapolis instead of the state university's business program was tense. "Art isn't a career," Dad said, his fork pausing midway to his mouth. "It's a hobby." "It's what I love," I replied. "It's what Mom loved too." Dad's expression softened at the mention of Mom, but he shook his head. "Your mother had talent, but she also had sense. She never expected to make a living from her paintings." Ethan watched this exchange with a slight smile. "Come on, Dad. Let her try. When it doesn't work out, there will always be a desk for her at the company." His condescension hurt worse than Dad's disapproval. Despite their doubts, I thrived in art school. I specialized in architectural preservation and historical restoration, combining my artistic skills with practical application. By 24, I had established a modest but growing reputation, restoring historic buildings and creating documentation of architectural heritage at risk of being lost. While I built my career in Minneapolis, I made regular trips home to the farmhouse. Despite our differences, the farm remained my emotional anchor. It was where Mom had lived and loved, where her spirit seemed to linger in the way sunlight filtered through the kitchen windows. The house itself was nearly 200 years old, built by early settlers and expanded over generations. It needed constant maintenance that Dad usually neglected in favor of reinvesting in the business. On my visits home, I'd often spend days repairing shutters, fixing leaky faucets, or restoring pieces of the intricate woodwork that had been damaged over time. Ethan rarely joined these family gatherings. He had an apartment near the company headquarters in the city 40 miles away and always claimed to be too busy with work. My favorite memories were the rare occasions when the three of us would gather on the wraparound porch on summer evenings. Dad would grill steaks, and for brief moments it felt like we were a complete family again. We would watch fireflies emerge across the fields as the sky turned purple, and Dad would tell stories about Mom that made us laugh until tears came. "Your mother once tried to teach a cow to pose for her paintings," he recalled one evening. "Stood out there with a handful of apples, trying to get that Holstein to look regal. Darned animal kept trying to eat her easel instead." Those nights revealed glimpses of the father I remembered from childhood, before grief and work had hardened him. Though he never quite understood my choices, there was love beneath his gruff exterior, showing through in unexpected ways, like the time he drove 3 hours to attend my first gallery showing, standing awkwardly among art critics, but beaming with quiet pride when someone bought one of my pieces. The farmhouse itself held generations of memories: the dining room table where we'd shared thousands of meals, the creaky third step on the staircase that we all instinctively skipped, the secret closet behind the pantry where Mom and I would hide Christmas presents, the massive oak tree with the tire swing where I'd spent countless summer hours dreaming. In a way, that old house was the physical manifestation of our family's history, imperfect but enduring. As different as our paths had become, the farmhouse remained the one place where Ethan, Dad, and I could momentarily bridge the growing gaps between us. It was the backdrop for every important family moment, from joyful celebrations to heartbreaking losses. Little did I know then how central that weathered farmhouse would become to our family's story, or how it would eventually reveal truths none of us could have imagined. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon while I was directing the restoration of a historic theater in downtown Minneapolis. Dad's voice sounded different, strained in a way I hadn't heard before. "Olivia, I need you to come home this weekend," he said without preamble. "Got some news to discuss." Something in his tone told me this wasn't about business or a family gathering. "Is everything okay, Dad?" The pause before he answered told me everything. "Just come home, sweetheart." I drove straight to the farm that evening instead of waiting for the weekend. When I arrived, Dad was sitting in his favorite armchair, looking smaller somehow. Medical papers were spread across the coffee table. "Pancreatic cancer, stage 4, 6 months, maybe less." The doctor's words, relayed through my father's matter-of-fact tone, hit me like physical blows. My strong, invincible father suddenly looked all of his 66 years and more. "Have you told Ethan?" I asked, still trying to process the news. "Left him a message. He's in Atlanta for a conference. Said he'd call back when he can." I took Dad to his follow-up appointments over the next few days. The prognosis remained grim. Treatment could buy time, but not change the outcome. As we drove home from the oncologist, Dad looked out at the passing fields golden with late summer wheat. "I want to stay at the farm," he said firmly. "No hospitals at the end." "Dad, you'll need care, professional care." He turned to me with a stubborn expression I knew all too well. "I've lived my life on my own terms, Olivia. I'll die the same way." Ethan finally called 3 days later. He spoke to Dad briefly, making promises to visit soon and take care of everything. After hanging up, Dad seemed satisfied, but I noticed he didn't mention the cancer had already spread to his liver. It was the first of many details he would shield from my brother. I returned to Minneapolis to put my life on pause. I arranged for a colleague to take over my current projects, packed essential belongings, and sublet my apartment. Within a week, I had moved back to the farmhouse. Ethan visited that weekend, bringing stacks of folders and spending most of the time with Dad in his study, discussing business matters. He barely acknowledged the oxygen tank now stationed beside Dad's chair, or the way our father needed to rest after speaking for more than a few minutes. "The treatment will buy us time to transition leadership smoothly," Ethan told me in the kitchen, his voice clinical and detached. "We've got succession plans in place. The board is prepared." "Dad's dying, Ethan," said bluntly. "This isn't about business plans right now." He looked at me with something like pity. "Everything is business, Olivia. Dad taught me that. The company is his legacy. We need to protect it." As autumn arrived, Dad's condition deteriorated faster than expected. The once robust man who could work 16-hour days became someone who needed help getting from his bed to the bathroom. I learned to administer medications, manage his increasingly complex symptoms, and interpret the subtle changes in his breathing that signaled pain or distress. Our quiet evenings together became precious. Between pain medications and brief periods of clarity, Dad would share stories I'd never heard before. About meeting Mom at a county fair when they were both 19. About nearly losing the business during a recession in the early days. About his own father's harsh parenting and his determination to do better with his own children. "I wasn't always successful at that," he admitted one evening, his voice barely above a whisper. "Especially after your mother died, I threw myself into what I understood. Work. Instead of what I didn't. Grief." I held his increasingly frail hand. "You did your best, Dad." He shook his head slightly. "Not always. But you're so much like her, Olivia. Your mom would be proud of the woman you've become." Ethan's visits grew more infrequent as Dad's illness progressed. He called daily, but always had reasons why he couldn't come to the farm: an important client meeting, a business trip, contract negotiations that couldn't wait. Dad never complained about Ethan's absence. "He's securing the future," he would say. "That's important too." But I saw the look in his eyes when another weekend passed without his son's visit. I heard him ask about Ethan first thing every morning, and I noticed how he would rally, summoning energy from some hidden reserve, on the rare occasions when Ethan did make the trip to see him. As winter approached, I became more than just a caregiver. I was a witness to my father's life, collecting his stories and memories like precious heirlooms. I recorded some of our conversations with his permission, knowing these would someday be all we had left of him. One snowy evening, after a particularly rough day of pain and nausea, Dad asked me to help him to the porch. Bundled in blankets with the oxygen tank beside him, he looked out at the snow-covered fields. "Your mother and I bought this land when we had nothing but dreams," he said. "Everyone said I was crazy to start a business with a new baby and no capital. But she believed in me." He paused, his breathing labored. "This place was always special to her. She said it had a soul." I nodded, thinking of Mom's paintings of the farm in different seasons, how she'd captured something essential about the land that went beyond simple landscapes. "Promise me something, Olivia," Dad continued. "Whatever happens after I'm gone, remember that some things have value beyond what you can see on the surface." Before I could ask what he meant, a coughing fit overtook him, and the moment passed. But his words lingered in my mind during the long nights that followed. Ethan called the next day to say he would be in Atlanta for 2 weeks, closing an international partnership. "It's what Dad would want me to prioritize," he insisted, when I expressed disappointment. "The business has to come first right now." I didn't bother telling him that Dad had asked for him specifically that morning during a moment of confusion, or that the hospice nurse had gently suggested we should be preparing for the end sooner rather than later. Some truths were becoming too painful to share. By December, Dad rarely left his bed. The hospice team visited daily, adjusting medications and helping me manage his increasing needs. I slept on a cot beside his bed, waking at the slightest change in his breathing. Ethan sent expensive care packages and arranged for additional nursing help, but he himself remained physically absent, always just a phone call or video chat away. On the night before Christmas Eve, Dad rallied unexpectedly, his eyes clearer than they had been in weeks. He asked to sit in his study. I helped him into the leather chair behind his desk, where he'd conducted business for decades. "Need to show you something," he said, gesturing weakly toward a painting on the wall. It was one of Mom's works, a simple watercolor of the farmhouse in spring. Behind it. Curious, I removed the painting to find a small wall safe I'd never known existed. Dad recited the combination with effort, each number seemingly pulled from deep within his fading memory. Inside was a folder of documents and a sealed envelope with my name written in Dad's handwriting. "Not now," he whispered. "After. Just remember what I said about value, Olivia. Not everything precious comes with a price tag." He refused to elaborate further, and by morning he had slipped back into semi-consciousness. I called Ethan this time with unmistakable urgency in my voice. "You need to come home now," I told him. "Not next week. Not after your meeting. Now." Ethan arrived the following evening, looking polished in his business suit but shocked by our father's transformation. The strong man who had built an empire was now skeletal, his breathing shallow and rattling. "Has he been awake at all?" Ethan asked, standing awkwardly at the foot of the bed. "In and out," I replied. "He's been asking for you." For the first time since Dad's diagnosis, I saw fear in my brother's eyes. Not the calculated concern of an heir to a parent, but the raw terror of a son about to lose his father. He sat beside the bed and tentatively took Dad's hand. "I'm here, Dad," he said softly. "I closed the Atlanta deal just like you taught me." Dad's eyes flickered open briefly, focusing on Ethan with effort. "Son?" he whispered, a ghost of a smile crossing his face before he drifted away again. Ethan stayed that night, pacing the farmhouse halls like a stranger. In the morning, he was on his phone again, handling business matters from the kitchen table. By afternoon, he was talking about needing to get back to the office. "He could go any time, Ethan," I said, my exhaustion making my words sharper than intended. "Is there nothing more important than the business right now?" "The business is what he cared about most," Ethan replied defensively. "Honoring that is how I show respect." Dad died the next morning at dawn. Ethan had left the previous evening, promising to return in 2 days. It was just me holding Dad's hand as he took his final breath, the winter sunrise painting the farmhouse in gold and pink light that reminded me powerfully of my mother's watercolors. The days following Dad's death passed in a blur of arrangements and decisions. True to his practical nature, Dad had pre-planned most of his funeral details. A simple service at the local church. Burial beside Mom in the small cemetery overlooking the farm. No elaborate displays or lengthy eulogies. Ethan arrived with an entourage of business associates. He handled the practical matters efficiently, making calls, organizing the service, and greeting the substantial crowd that gathered to pay respects to Robert Hayes, the business leader. I focused on the personal touches Dad would have wanted. The photographs from happier times displayed in simple frames, Mom's favorite wildflowers arranged beside the casket, the old hymns that had always moved him to tears. The funeral itself was a study in contrasts. The business community arrived in dark suits, speaking in hushed tones about succession plans and stock values. The local farming families came in their Sunday best, sharing stories about Dad's generosity during hard times and his handshake deals that had saved more than one family farm from foreclosure. Ethan delivered a polished eulogy focusing on Dad's business acumen and legacy of innovation in agricultural services. I spoke briefly about the father behind the businessman, the man who taught me to fish in the pond behind the barn, who never missed a school art show despite his packed schedule, who kept every Mother's Day card we'd ever made in a special drawer of his desk. After the burial, people gathered at the farmhouse. I moved through the rooms in a daze, accepting condolences and trying to be the hostess Dad would have expected me to be. Ethan worked the crowd like a politician, reassuring business partners and discussing the company's future plans with board members in hushed conversations. "Your brother's certainly ready to step into your father's shoes," commented Thomas Riley, our family's longtime attorney and Dad's closest friend. "Robert would be proud of his composure today." I nodded, too tired to explain how that composure had been notably absent during Dad's illness. Thomas patted my hand sympathetically. "The reading of the will is scheduled for tomorrow morning at my office," he said. 10 calm, just you and Ethan, as Robert requested. That night, after everyone had gone, I sat alone on the porch swing, wrapped in one of Dad's old cardigans. The farmhouse felt emptier than it ever had before, creaking and sighing in the winter wind, as if it too were mourning. Ethan had returned to his hotel in town, claiming he needed to prepare some documents for the morning meeting. The next day dawned cold and clear. I arrived at Thomas's downtown office to find Ethan already there, reviewing papers with another man I recognized as the company's financial officer. They stopped talking abruptly when I entered, exchanging glances that made me instantly uneasy. Thomas welcomed us into his wood-paneled office, the walls lined with law books and framed photographs documenting his 50-year friendship with my father, fishing trips, award ceremonies, family picnics from when we were children. Robert and I discussed his wishes at length over the past few months. Thomas began after we were seated. He was very clear about his intentions, though he anticipated you might find some of his decisions surprising. Ethan straightened his tie, a gesture of confidence I recognized from childhood. "I'm sure Dad made appropriate arrangements," he said smoothly. "He always had a good head for these matters." Thomas nodded and began reading the formal legal document. The language was dense with legal terminology, but the essentials soon became clear. Ethan was bequeathed full ownership of Hayes Farm Solutions, including all subsidiaries, patents, and business assets. As the current COO, he would assume the role of CEO immediately with the board's blessing already secured. I listened without surprise. This was always the plan from the time Ethan was old enough to understand what the business was. Dad had built his company for his son to inherit. Ethan's expression remained neutral, though a slight smile played at the corners of his mouth. Then Thomas turned to the portion of the will addressing my inheritance. "To my beloved daughter, Olivia Margaret Hayes, I leave the family farmhouse and surrounding 5 acres, along with its contents and outbuildings." There was a moment of silence. Ethan's smile widened perceptibly. "That's it?" I asked, more confused than disappointed. "Just the house." Thomas continued reading. "It is my belief that Olivia will understand the value of this inheritance, as she has always appreciated what truly matters in life." Ethan couldn't contain himself any longer. He let out a short laugh. "Well, that seems fair. The multi-million-dollar business to the son who helped build it, and the rundown farmhouse to the daughter who chose art over responsibility." Thomas gave him a sharp look, but continued reading various smaller bequests to employees and charitable organizations. When he finished, he closed the folder with a deliberate motion. "Are there any questions?" he asked formally. Ethan stood, straightening his suit jacket. "I think it's all quite straightforward. I'll have the company legal team review the transition documents this afternoon. We should be operational under the new leadership structure by Monday." He turned to me, his expression a mixture of sympathy and condescension that made my stomach turn. "Don't worry, sis. I'll make sure the property taxes on that old place are covered for the first year. Give you time to figure out what to do with it. Probably best to sell. It's going to need at least $100,000 in repairs just to be habitable long-term." I remained seated, still processing the implications. The farmhouse was my childhood home, full of memories and meaning, but also a financial burden I wasn't prepared for. My restoration business was successful but modest, and I'd drained most of my savings during the 6 months I'd taken off to care for Dad. "I'll need some time to consider my options," I said finally. Ethan checked his watch impatiently. "Well, don't take too long. I've already had inquiries from developers interested in that land. It could be worth something with the right zoning changes." As we prepared to leave, Ethan paused at the door. "You know, Olivia," he said, his voice lowered to ensure Thomas couldn't hear from across the room. "Maybe if you'd taken better care of him, things might have turned out differently. Dad always responded to loyalty." The casual cruelty of his words stunned me into silence. Before I could respond, he was gone, his footsteps echoing down the hallway as he returned to the business empire he now controlled. I sat back down suddenly, unable to stand. "Are you all right?" Thomas asked, concern evident in his voice. "I don't understand," I said. "The business is worth millions. The farmhouse needs a new roof, new wiring, probably new plumbing. It's practically a liability." Thomas cleared his throat. "Olivia, before you leave today, there's something else we need to discuss in private." After ensuring we were truly alone, Thomas walked to his office door and locked it, an unusual action that immediately caught my attention. He returned to his desk and pressed a button on his phone. "Susan, hold all my calls for the next hour, please. No interruptions." He sat down and leaned forward, his professional demeanor shifting to something more personal, reminding me that this was not just our family lawyer, but my father's oldest friend. "What I'm about to share with you was stipulated by your father to remain confidential from the public reading of the will," Thomas said, retrieving a sealed envelope from his desk drawer. "Robert was explicit that this information be conveyed to you alone." My heart began beating faster. "What do you mean? Why wouldn't he want Ethan to know?" Thomas sighed deeply. "Your father was a complex man, Olivia. Brilliant in business, but also deeply intuitive about people, including his own children." He handed me the envelope. It was heavier than expected, sealed with wax in an old-fashioned manner that seemed so characteristic of my traditionalist father. My name was written across the front in his distinctive handwriting. "Before you open that," Thomas continued, "I need to explain something about the farmhouse you've inherited. It's not just a sentimental gift, nor is it the liability your brother believes it to be." I waited, confused but increasingly curious. "When your mother became ill," Thomas explained, "your father began making contingency plans. Margaret's death hit him harder than anyone knew. He realized how unprepared he'd been for losing her, and he determined never to be caught unprepared again. The farmhouse became central to those plans." "What plans?" I asked. "The property you've inherited isn't just the house and 5 acres mentioned in the public will. There's an additional 300 acres held in a separate trust that transfers to your ownership effective immediately. Land that includes lake frontage, forested areas, and agricultural fields currently leased to neighboring farms." I struggled to process this information. 300 acres? But the company owns all the surrounding land. Ethan would know if... Thomas shook his head. "The land was purchased gradually over 15 years through a series of holding companies. On paper, it appears to belong to various entities, but the trust documentation in that envelope consolidates ownership and transfers it to you." My mind raced. 300 acres of prime rural land would be worth millions in itself, especially with water rights and timber. But it didn't make sense. Why would Dad hide this? Why give Ethan the business but secretly give me land that could be more valuable? "That's not all," Thomas continued. "The farmhouse itself contains assets not mentioned in the public will. Your father renovated the old root cellar beneath the east wing 7 years ago, converting it into a climate-controlled storage facility. What's stored there is itemized in those documents but includes your mother's complete art collection, much more extensive than what was displayed in the house. My breath caught. Mom had been a prolific artist, but we'd only seen a fraction of her work displayed over the years. How many pieces are we talking about? Over 300 paintings and sketches, most never exhibited publicly. Robert had several pieces appraised discreetly over the years. Conservative estimates place the collection's value at approximately $12 million. The room seemed to spin slightly. $12 million in Mom's paintings. Thomas nodded. Margaret's work has appreciated considerably since her death. Several galleries and museums have expressed interest in acquiring pieces, but Robert refused all offers. He was saving the collection for you. I opened the envelope with trembling hands. Inside was a thick folder of legal documents, a handwritten letter from Dad, and a flash drive. The drive contains architectural plans, Thomas explained. Your father worked with a sustainable development consultant to create a proposal for the property, an eco-friendly resort and artist retreat that would preserve the natural features of the land while creating a viable business. He called it Margaret's vision in his notes. As I skimmed the documents, the full scope of Dad's planning became clear. The farmhouse wasn't just a sentimental inheritance. It was the centerpiece of a carefully orchestrated legacy that combined Mom's artistic influence and Dad's business acumen. A legacy designed specifically for me, leveraging my background in historical preservation and architectural restoration. The startup capital is also arranged, Thomas added. A separate insurance policy not connected to the business pays out $5 million to fund initial development. The policy documentation is included there. I looked up from the papers, overwhelmed. Did Ethan have any idea about this? Thomas shook his head. Robert was explicit that Ethan should focus entirely on the core business. He felt Ethan's strengths were in traditional agricultural services, not creative development. He also worried that if Ethan knew about the art collection or the land trust, he might try to incorporate them into the company. So when Dad left me just the farmhouse in the will, he was giving you an opportunity that he believed perfectly suited your talents and sensibilities, Thomas finished, while giving Ethan the business opportunity that suited his. I unfolded Dad's letter last, recognizing his handwriting despite how shaky it had become in his final months. My dear Olivia, by now Thomas will have explained the full extent of your inheritance. I apologize for the theatrics of a secret bequest, but I've learned over the years that sometimes the right path isn't always the most direct one. When your mother died, I made a mistake. I channeled all my grief into building the business, believing I was creating security for you and Ethan. In the process, I nearly lost sight of what Margaret valued most: beauty, creativity, and the land itself. The farmhouse was always more than just a building to her. It was the soul of our family, as she used to say. The art hidden below was her true legacy, not the financial success I achieved. It took me too many years to understand this. I've divided my life's work between my children in a way that honors who each of you truly is. Ethan has always seen value through the lens of traditional business. You see it through your mother's eyes, the beauty in what endures, what sustains, what brings joy. The plans enclosed represent my vision for what could be, but the choices are yours to make. The only condition attached to this inheritance is that your mother's artwork eventually be made accessible to the public in whatever manner you deem appropriate. I'm proud of you, Olivia. Your dedication these past months showed me I made the right decision long ago. Some might see it as unfair that you receive this hidden wealth while appearing to get only a small portion in. The public will. But true value has never been about appearances. All my love, Dad. Tears blurred my vision as I finished reading. Even in death, Dad was teaching me lessons about value and perception. The unfairness I'd initially felt at the will reading transformed into a profound sense of being deeply known and understood by my father. "What happens now?" I asked Thomas carefully, returning the letter to the envelope. "That's entirely up to you," he replied. "The trusts are structured to minimize tax implications, and all legal documents are in order. You could sell everything and walk away with a substantial fortune. Or you could pursue the development plan your father envisioned or chart an entirely different course." "And Ethan? What do I tell him?" Thomas's expression turned serious. "That's a personal decision, but you should know something. Hayes Farm Solutions is facing significant challenges that Ethan may not fully comprehend yet. Your father restructured the company considerably over the past 2 years, selling off certain divisions and acquiring others. The Atlanta deal Ethan was so focused on completing is part of a larger strategy that requires careful navigation." "Are you saying the business is in trouble?" "Not exactly, but it will require skillful management through a transition period. Robert believed Ethan had the potential to succeed, but he would need to focus entirely on the core business without distraction." The implications were clear. Dad had separated the inheritances not just based on our different temperaments, but as a strategic decision. Ethan would need all his attention and resources to keep the business thriving while my inheritance was both more stable and more aligned with my strengths. "I need time to process all this," I said finally. Thomas nodded understandingly. "Of course, but I suggest you visit the farmhouse soon, specifically the root cellar. There are security measures in place that require your biometric authentication within 30 days of the will reading." As I gathered the documents to leave, a final thought occurred to me. "Thomas, does the company have any legal claim to the land in the trust? Any historical connection?" "None whatsoever," he assured me. "Your father was meticulous about keeping the properties separate. The farmhouse and surrounding land were always held personally by your parents, never as company assets." I left Thomas's office with my head spinning, the weight of the envelope in my bag, nothing compared to the weight of decisions now resting on my shoulders. The inheritance I'd thought was merely sentimental had transformed into something I couldn't yet fully comprehend. A carefully crafted opportunity that honored both my parents' legacies. As I drove back toward the farmhouse, my farmhouse now, I couldn't help but imagine how different Ethan's expression would be if he knew what lay beneath the weathered floorboards and behind the peeling wallpaper of the home he'd so casually dismissed. 3 days after meeting with Thomas, I stood in the converted root cellar beneath the east wing of the farmhouse, surrounded by my mother's art. The space was remarkable. A perfectly controlled environment with specialized lighting and storage systems that must have cost a small fortune to install. Paintings were arranged chronologically from Mom's earliest college works to pieces completed just weeks before her diagnosis. Many I recognized, but far more were completely new to me. Landscapes of the farm in every season, portraits of Dad as a young man, his face unlined and eyes full of ambition. Even several paintings of Ethan and me as children captured in moments of unguarded joy. Seeing our family history through Mom's eyes brought fresh grief, but also a profound appreciation for the legacy Dad had preserved. I was photographing and cataloging a particularly striking painting of the farmhouse at sunset when my phone chimed with a text from Ethan. "Need to meet. Coming to the farm now. Important business matter." No greeting. No acknowledgement of our last interaction, just a demand for my attention, typical of our recent communications. I sighed, secured the storage area with the biometric lock Thomas had explained, and headed upstairs to wait. Ethan arrived 30 minutes later, parking his luxury SUV in a spray of gravel. He entered without knocking, his footsteps echoing through the entryway with familiar impatience. "There you are," he said, finding me in the kitchen. He looked more disheveled than I'd seen him in years. His normally immaculate suit was wrinkled, and dark circles shadowed his eyes. "We need to talk about the property." I offered him coffee, which he accepted with a distracted nod. "What about the property?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. "I've been reviewing Dad's recent business transactions," he said, drumming his fingers on the counter. "There are some irregularities I'm trying to untangle." Did Dad ever mention purchasing additional land around the farm? So, he was already discovering gaps in his knowledge. I considered my options carefully, remembering Thomas's warning about the company's precarious transition. "Dad and I talked about many things during his illness," I said truthfully. "But mostly personal matters, not business." Ethan's eyes narrowed slightly. "The thing is, we're missing about 300 acres that should be in the company portfolio, parcels that were slated for agricultural testing facilities. The records show purchase approvals, but the deeds are nowhere to be found." "That sounds like something to discuss with the company legal team," I suggested. "I already have." His tone sharpened. "They're as confused as I am." But then, something interesting came up. Apparently, Dad created some kind of trust recently, and guess who's mentioned as the beneficiary? He was watching me closely now, looking for a reaction. I kept my expression neutral, though my heart had begun racing. "I wouldn't know anything about Dad's financial arrangements?" I said. "Cut the act, Olivia," Ethan snapped. "I know Dad left you more than just this rundown house. My sources at the county records office found transfers of multiple land parcels to a trust with your name on it. Land worth millions that should have gone to the company." So, he'd been investigating. I shouldn't have been surprised. Ethan always had connections and wasn't above using them to get information. "Whatever Dad chose to leave me was his decision," I said firmly. "Just like giving you the entire business was his decision." Ethan laughed humorlessly. "The business that's suddenly missing key assets we need for expansion. The business that's carrying more debt than I realized, because Dad leveraged himself to buy land he apparently gave to you. That business." His anger was building visibly, a flush creeping up his neck. "What did you do, Olivia? Manipulate him while he was sick? Play the dutiful daughter while whispering poison about me?" The accusation stung all the more for its complete inversion of reality. "I took care of our dying father for 6 months while you were too busy to visit more than a handful of times," I replied, my own anger rising to match his. "If anyone had his ear during that time, it was you on those precious phone calls he waited by the phone for." "I was running his company." Ethan's voice rose. "I was changing his bedpan. I was administering his morphine at 3 odd in the morning. I was listening to him cry out for Mom in his sleep. Where were you when he needed his son?" "Closing deals in Atlanta," Ethan shot back. The words burst out louder than I intended. He flinched as if I'd struck him physically but recovered quickly. "That's not fair. Dad understood what I was doing. He built that company from nothing. He always said the business comes first." "He was a human being before he was a CEO," I said more quietly. "He needed his family at the end, not his succession plan." A tense silence fell between us. Ethan paced the kitchen, running a hand through his disheveled hair. Finally, he spoke in a more controlled voice. "Look, whatever happened is in the past. The reality is that the company needs those land parcels for planned expansion projects. Projects that will create jobs and continue Dad's legacy. I'm prepared to offer you fair market value for the property." I shook my head. "It's not for sale." "Don't be difficult, Olivia. You're an artist, not a land developer. What are you going to do with 300 acres of farmland? Paint pretty pictures of it?" "I have plans," I said simply. "What plans?" He scoffed. "Turn it into some kind of artist commune? Build birdhouses? Whatever amateur scheme you're considering, I can guarantee the land will be more valuable as part of Hayes Farm Solutions. His dismissive attitude reminded me painfully of how he'd always viewed my career and choices. Always the amateur, never the professional. Always the dreamer, never the achiever. Dad didn't think so, I replied. He left this property to me because he believed I would honor its value beyond its development potential. He had specific ideas about its use. Ethan's eyes narrowed. What are you talking about? What specific ideas? I hesitated. Thomas hadn't explicitly told me to keep the eco-resort plan secret from Ethan, but Dad's letter had made it clear he wanted our inheritances to remain separate. Ideas that don't involve selling to the company, I said finally. Ethan's face hardened. This is ridiculous. You're being selfish and short-sighted just like always. Dad wasn't thinking clearly at the end. Everyone knows that. The medication, the pain. It affects decision-making. Dad planned this years ago, I countered. Thomas confirmed it. Thomas? Ethan practically spat the name. Dad's drinking buddy playing at being a sophisticated estate attorney. He should have retired a decade ago. He was Dad's closest friend and trusted advisor. He was a small-town lawyer who got lucky, landing a successful client early in his career. Ethan's contempt was palpable. Whatever he's told you about these arrangements, I'm having it reviewed by actual experts. If there's any indication Dad was unduly influenced or not of sound mind, I'll contest the entire trust. The threat hung in the air between us. I thought of the meticulous documentation in the envelope Thomas had given me, the years of planning evident in every detail. You won't win, I said with more confidence than I felt. Dad knew exactly what he was doing. Ethan stepped closer, his voice dropping to a dangerous quiet. You have no idea what you're up against, Olivia. I have resources you can't imagine, legal teams that can tie this up for years. By the time it's resolved, whatever value you think you've inherited will be drained away in attorney fees. Is that really how you want to honor Dad's memory? By fighting over his legacy? I asked by fighting over his legacy. His legacy is the company, Ethan insisted. Everything else is secondary. That's where you're wrong, I said. His legacy is what he valued most. His family, this land, Mom's memory. The company was just the means to protect those things. Ethan shook his head in disbelief. You really have no idea how business works, do you? This sentimental nonsense might make you feel better about getting a windfall you didn't earn, but it doesn't change reality. The company needs that land. Maybe the company should focus on what it already has, I suggested. From what I understand, there are more pressing challenges facing Hayes Farm Solutions than expansion projects. Ethan's expression changed, suspicion replacing anger. What do you mean? What did Thomas tell you about the company? I realized I'd said too much. Nothing specific. Just that Dad had made some recent changes that would require careful management. Thomas had no right to discuss company business with you. Ethan's voice was cold. You're not a shareholder or board member. Any information about Hayes Farm Solutions is confidential. I'm still Dad's daughter, I reminded him, and apparently, neighbor to company property. Maybe we should be discussing cooperation instead of conflict. Ethan studied me for a long moment, calculation replacing raw emotion in his eyes. All right, let's try another approach. Partnership. The company develops a portion of the land for agricultural research. You keep the rest for whatever hobby project you're considering. We both benefit. The condescension in his tone when he said hobby project made it clear what he thought of any plans I might have. Still, it was the first hint of compromise he'd offered. I'll consider it, I said, not committing to anything. I need time to review all the documentation and understand exactly what Dad envisioned. Ethan checked his watch. already shifting back to business mode. Fine, think about it. But don't take too long. The Atlanta partners are expecting progress on the testing facilities by next quarter. He headed for the door, then paused. One more thing. Whatever you decide, keep it quiet for now. The last thing the company needs is rumors about disputed property holdings. Bad for the stock price. After he left, I sat at the kitchen table, my coffee long cold, thinking about the encounter. Ethan hadn't changed in his eyes. I was still the impractical younger sister who didn't understand real business. But something had shifted in our dynamic. For perhaps the first time in our adult lives, I held something he needed. The question was, what would I do with that leverage? I pulled out Dad's letter again, rereading his words about honoring who each of us truly was. Then I opened the architectural plans for Margaret's vision on my laptop. The designs were beautiful, harmonizing with the natural landscape while creating spaces for both tourism and artistic creation. Sustainable buildings that resembled modern versions of traditional farm structures. Gardens that incorporated Mom's favorite native plants. Even a small gallery space designed to showcase her work. Dad had created more than just an inheritance for me. He'd created a vision that combined both parents' legacies. A vision that Ethan, for all his business acumen, might never fully understand or appreciate. As the sun set over the fields that now belonged to me, I made a decision. I would not sell to Ethan or the company. I would honor Dad's intention by bringing Margaret's vision to life. And if that meant conflict with my brother, so be it. Some legacies were worth fighting for. The next morning, I drove into town to meet with Thomas again, bringing along the detailed plans for the eco-resort. After reviewing them together, his assessment confirmed what I'd already sensed about my father's foresight. "These plans are remarkably thorough," Thomas said, examining the architectural renderings. "Robert spent years putting this together. With top consultants in sustainable tourism and environmental conservation, the phased development approach is particularly clever, minimizes initial investment while allowing for organic growth based on market response." "It's beautiful," I agreed, "but I'm not a developer or a business manager. I restore historic buildings. I don't create destination resorts." Thomas smiled. "Which is precisely why the first phase focuses on restoring and repurposing the existing farm structures, a perfect match for your expertise." Robert included a management plan that brings in operational partners for the hospitality components once the physical infrastructure is established. We spent hours going through the financial projections, which were as meticulously planned as everything else. The insurance policy provided ample startup capital, and the business model showed sustainability within 3 years. Dad had thought of everything. "What about Ethan?" I finally asked. "He's already threatening legal action. Says he'll tie this up in court for years if necessary." Thomas's expression turned serious. "Ethan may find himself too preoccupied with other matters to pursue extended litigation." "What does that mean?" Thomas hesitated, clearly weighing professional obligations against friendship. "I can't discuss specifics of the company's situation, but I will say this. Hayes Farm Solutions is facing a perfect storm of challenges. The Atlanta deal Ethan was so focused on completing has significant downside risks that won't become apparent for another quarter. Several key patents are expiring, and 3 major clients are considering moving to competitors. Robert saw it coming. He tried to prepare Ethan, but your brother was convinced his aggressive expansion strategy would overcome any obstacles." Thomas sighed. "Your father hedged his bets. He gave Ethan full control of the business because he believed in his potential, but he created a separate legacy for you as insurance for the family's overall prosperity." The implications were becoming clearer. Dad hadn't just been dividing his assets according to our interests and abilities. He'd been creating a safety net for the entire family legacy. "So, what do I do now?" I asked. Proceed with Phase 1 of the development plan, Thomas advised. Secure the proper permits, begin restoration of the main structures, and establish the legal framework for the business. Meanwhile, I'll handle any legal challenges from Ethan, though I suspect his attention will soon be diverted elsewhere. Over the next few weeks, I threw myself into bringing Margaret's vision to life. I hired an architectural firm specializing in historic preservation to assess the farmhouse and outbuildings. I met with environmental consultants to survey the land and waterways. I began researching grant opportunities for arts-based rural development. The work felt right, combining my professional skills with a deeper purpose, honoring both my parents' legacies. Each evening, I would spend time in the hidden gallery beneath the house, drawing inspiration from Mom's paintings. I began to see the property through her artistic eyes and Dad's entrepreneurial vision simultaneously. Meanwhile, Ethan was uncharacteristically quiet. No more threats, no more surprise visits. According to Thomas, he was suddenly very busy with company matters, spending long hours at the office and canceling social engagements. I tried calling him twice, but both calls went to voicemail. Then, about a month after our confrontation, local business news reported that Hayes Farm Solutions was unexpectedly restructuring several divisions. Anonymous sources cited cash flow concerns and the underperformance of recent acquisitions. The company's stock dropped 15% in a single day. 2 days later, Ethan appeared at the farmhouse. He looked terrible. Unshaven with dark circles under his eyes and a rumpled suit that suggested he'd been wearing it for days. "You knew," he said accusingly as soon as I opened the door. "You and Thomas and Dad. You all knew the Atlanta deal was a trap." I invited him in, concerned despite our recent animosity. He followed me to the kitchen, moving like a man twice his age. "Ethan, what's happened?" He sank into a chair at the table where we'd eaten countless family meals. "The Japanese partners misrepresented their technology patents. The integration costs are triple what we projected. 3 major clients have already canceled their contracts, citing uncertainty about the company's direction. The board is calling for my resignation unless I can stop the bleeding within 90 days. His hand shook slightly as he ran it through his hair. 6 months as CEO, and I'm about to lose everything Dad built. Despite everything, my heart ached for him. For all his faults, Ethan truly cared about the company and Dad's business legacy. "It can't be that bad," I said, putting on water for coffee. "The company has survived downturns before." "Not like this." His voice was hollow. "We're over-leveraged from the acquisition strategy I pushed for. Asset values are down, and now I find out Dad sold off the most stable revenue-generating divisions last year and redirected the capital into riskier ventures." I remembered Thomas's words about Dad restructuring the company significantly. "Why would he do that?" I asked carefully. Ethan laughed bitterly. "According to the board members, he confided in them he was creating entrepreneurial opportunity for me, challenging me to prove myself by rebuilding rather than just maintaining." He shook his head. "He set me up to fail." "I don't believe that," I said firmly. "Dad wouldn't undermine the company or your leadership. There must be a strategy you're not seeing." "Easy for you to say," Ethan retorted, some of his old sharpness returning. "You got the safe inheritance, tangible assets, no employees depending on you, no shareholders watching your every move." "It doesn't have to be a competition," I said. "Maybe we're meant to work together." Ethan's eyes narrowed, suspicion replacing despair. "What do you mean?" Instead of explaining, I led him to my makeshift office in Dad's old study. Spread across the walls were the plans for Margaret's vision, detailed renderings of the eco-resort, sustainability metrics, marketing strategies, and financial projections. "What is all this?" he asked, studying the materials with growing interest. Dad's plan for the farmland, a sustainable luxury resort and arts center. The first phase is already underway. I've secured preliminary permits and begun restoration of the main buildings. Ethan moved from document to document, his trained business eye assessing the project. These projections are impressive. Properly executed, this could be a significant enterprise. That's not all, I said, showing him the digital catalog I'd begun of Mom's art collection. There are over 300 pieces stored in a climate-controlled facility Dad built beneath the house. The collection is worth millions, but more importantly, it provides a unique identity for the resort. For the first time since he'd arrived, Ethan seemed fully present, his mind engaged with the potential before him. An art-centric destination resort would differentiate from standard rural tourism. The architectural approach leverages the authentic farm structures while modernizing the functionality. He nodded appreciatively. It's actually brilliant. It's Mom and Dad together, I said softly. Her artistic vision, his business sense. Ethan was quiet for a long moment. And where do I fit into this plan? Or was this meant to be your domain exclusively? It was a fair question, and one I'd been considering since our last confrontation. The resort will need a business operations component that goes beyond my expertise. Financial management, marketing, strategy, investor relations. If we expand beyond the initial phases, areas where Hayes Farm Solutions is actually quite strong. Ethan said thoughtfully. Exactly. What if the company became a partner in the development, not taking ownership of the land but providing management services and operational support in exchange for revenue sharing? Ethan considered this, his analytical mind visibly working through the implications. A partnership would provide the company with stable service revenue during this transition period, and the association with a premium destination project would help rebuild market confidence. It could be the beginning of a new division focused on hospitality and tourism management, I suggested, diversifying beyond traditional agricultural services. A pivot rather than a failure, Ethan mused. The board might actually go for that. We spent the rest of the day outlining a potential collaboration, our complementary skills creating a stronger plan than either of us could have developed alone. Ethan's business acumen filled gaps in the operational framework, while my commitment to authenticity and artistic integrity gave the project its soul. As evening approached, we found ourselves on the porch swing, reminiscent of childhood days before competition and resentment had infected our relationship. Why didn't you tell me about the company's problems when we first met after the will reading? I asked. Ethan looked out over the fields now painted gold by the setting sun. Pride. Stubbornness. I thought I could fix everything myself. Prove I was worthy of Dad's confidence. He sighed. The same reason I lashed out at you. It was easier to blame you than admit I might be failing. And why didn't you tell me about all this? He asked, gesturing toward the house and land. About Mom's art. The resort plans. I considered the question carefully. At first, I was hurt by how you'd treated me during Dad's illness. Then, after your threats, I was angry. But mostly, I think I needed time to understand what Dad intended, what this inheritance really meant. Ethan nodded slowly. I'm beginning to see it too. He wasn't just dividing assets. He was creating complementary paths forward, challenging both of us in different ways. As darkness fell, Ethan prepared to leave, looking more purposeful than when he'd arrived. At the door, he hesitated. I'm sorry, Olivia, for what I said after the funeral about you not taking good enough care of Dad. It was cruel and untrue. You were there for him in ways I couldn't or wouldn't be. He swallowed hard. I was jealous of the time you had with him at the end, the connection you shared. The apology, unexpected and clearly difficult for him, broke something open between us. Tears I hadn't realized I was holding back spilled over. He loved you so much, Ethan. He talked about you constantly, bragged about your business deals, even when he could barely speak. I wiped my eyes. He never doubted you would find your way, even if the path wasn't straight. We hugged briefly, awkwardly, years of distance not immediately bridged, but perhaps beginning to narrow. As Ethan drove away, I felt something shift. A sense that maybe, just maybe, Dad's true legacy would be the reconciliation of his children, brought together by the complementary gifts he'd left each of us. 1 year to the day after Dad's death, Margaret's Vision Resort and Arts Center welcomed its first guests. The transformation of the property had been remarkable, though it maintained the authentic character that made it special. The farmhouse stood at the center, lovingly restored to its original grandeur but updated with modern amenities. The barn had become a gallery, showcasing Mom's artwork with rotating exhibitions drawing art lovers from across the region. New eco-cabins, nearly invisible from certain angles, blended into the landscape along the lake shore. Ethan and I stood on the porch, watching as the first families explored the grounds, children racing toward the apple orchard where new trees had been planted, alongside the century-old ones. Dad would be proud, Ethan said, surveying what we'd built together. It's better than the original plans. He was right. Our collaboration had improved every aspect of the project. Ethan's business instincts had refined the operational model, while my commitment to authenticity and artistic integrity had given the resort its unique character. What had begun as a partnership of necessity had evolved into a genuine collaboration that honored both our strengths. The past year hadn't been without challenges. The company, Hayes Farm Solutions, had indeed faced a difficult transition period. Ethan had been forced to make hard decisions, downsizing certain divisions and completely reimagining others. There had been painful layoffs and intense board meetings where his leadership was questioned. But the partnership with Margaret's Vision had provided a lifeline, both financially and in terms of market perception. The new hospitality management division, started specifically to support the resort, had grown to serve other boutique destinations. The stable revenue helped offset losses in more volatile agricultural sectors, and the association with the high-profile sustainable resort burnished the company's image as forward-thinking and adaptable. The Atlanta deal wasn't a complete disaster, Ethan reflected. It taught me I'm not infallible. Dad knew I needed that lesson. I smiled, thinking of how our father had indeed understood his children better than we'd realized. He knew we needed each other too. Different perspectives, complementary strengths. We discovered a cache of Dad's journals in his office safe 6 months earlier, private records of his thoughts and plans stretching back decades. The entries from after his diagnosis revealed the depth of his strategic thinking about our inheritances. Ethan sees the world through the lens of markets and assets, he'd written. Olivia through beauty and history. Both perspectives are valuable, both incomplete on their own. My hope is that they will eventually recognize how much stronger they are together than apart. It had taken loss, anger, and near disaster to bring us to that recognition. But in the end, Dad's hope had been fulfilled. We'd found a way to honor both parents' legacies while forging something new that was uniquely ours. The hidden value of my inheritance had proved to be far more than the land, the art, or even the business opportunity. It was the chance to reconnect with my brother, to heal old wounds, and to create something meaningful that would outlast us both. As the afternoon light painted the restored farmhouse in the same golden hues that had inspired so many of Mom's paintings, I thought about the journey of the past 18 months. From caregiver to grieving daughter to reluctant heiress to confident entrepreneur, each role had shaped me, challenged me, and ultimately led me to a deeper understanding of what truly mattered. You know, Ethan said, interrupting my thoughts, I've been thinking about what Dad said in those journals about complementary perspectives. Maybe we should consider expanding the board of Hayes Farm Solutions to include more diverse viewpoints: artists, conservationists, community representatives. That's surprisingly progressive of you, I teased. He shrugged. The old ways weren't working. Sometimes you need to completely reimagine something to save it. This from my formerly tradition-bound brother who once mocked my impractical career choices. The change in him wasn't just professional, it was personal. He'd learned humility, flexibility, and the value of perspectives different from his own. I'd undergone my own transformation too, developing business confidence and strategic thinking I never knew I possessed. That evening, we hosted a small private ceremony in the gallery. The centerpiece was the unveiling of a previously undiscovered painting of Mom's, a family portrait she'd completed shortly before her illness. Dad, Ethan, and me, seated on the very porch swing where we'd shared so many conversations, our faces younger, unmarked by the losses and challenges that would come, but somehow also less complete than the people we had become. As guests circulated through the gallery, I overheard snippets of conversation about the remarkable partnership between the artistic sister and business-minded brother, about how unusual it was for siblings to collaborate so effectively after inheriting different aspects of a family legacy, about the unique vision that had created a destination honoring both agricultural heritage and artistic expression. What they couldn't see was how close we'd come to destroying that legacy through resentment and misunderstanding. How Dad's seemingly unequal division of assets had actually been a carefully designed puzzle that could only be solved through cooperation. Later, alone in the farmhouse that had been the source of so much conflict and ultimately healing, I reread Dad's letter from that first meeting with Thomas. One line stood out with new significance. True value has never been about appearances. The true value of what Dad left us wasn't in the business or the property, substantial as they were. It was in the opportunity to see beyond our differences and recognize the strength in our connection. To understand that family legacy isn't just what's passed down, but what's built together. Ethan and I had started as competitors over what we thought was an unequal inheritance, only to discover we'd each received exactly what we needed. Not just material assets, but the challenge to grow beyond our limitations and the chance to rebuild a relationship that had fractured long ago. That was Dad's final gift to us both. Not the business or the land, but the wisdom to see that true wealth lies in connections, to people, to place, and to purpose. Everything else is just details on a balance sheet. What's your take on family inheritance? Disputes? Have you ever discovered something valuable that wasn't what it first appeared to be? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments. And if this resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share this with someone who might need to hear that sometimes the most precious inheritances aren't the ones listed in the will. Thank you for joining me on this journey. And remember that true healing often begins when we're willing to look beyond appearances to find deeper value.